Reading this latest update leaves me with mixed emotions, Eagles fans, because I am thrilled about clearing cap space, but worried about our defensive depth. A national network just proposed a specific trade resulting in the possible departure of Nolan Smith. Because of his upcoming contract situation, experts believe moving him now might be the smartest business decision for Philadelphia. Should we keep him or cash in? Stick around to find out. I am Mike, hosting Eagles Daily. We are building this channel from the ground up, pushing toward 3,000 subscribers. So please like and subscribe to join us from the start. Nolan Smith Jr. is staring down a potential exit from Philadelphia after ESPN analyst Seth Walder predicted our former first-round pick will be traded before the 2027 season. I remember the high hopes we held when we drafted him, but his current standing as a secondary or third option behind Jonathan Greenard tells a much colder story. Walder's logic centers on the final year of his rookie deal, suggesting that moving him now for draft capital is far smarter than letting him walk for nothing. Think about it this way: is it truly wise to keep a former high pick in a reserve role when we could leverage his remaining value to bolster other roster holes? I am genuinely excited about the depth we have built on the edge, but I also want to pump the brakes a little before we start shipping off young talent we invested so much time in developing. It is a harsh reality of the business, especially with Jalyx Hunt also being mentioned as a potential candidate for a similar move due to our crowded defensive room. Does this projection from Walder reflect the actual front office plan, or are we just watching an analyst stir the pot regarding our cap flexibility? The competition under our current staff has clearly pushed these younger players into a tight spot, and I cannot help but wonder if their development has been stunted by the recent acquisition of veteran pass rushers. Seeing a guy like Smith potentially leave before hitting his ceiling is tough for any fan to swallow, but I have to look at the cold math of salary caps and roster spots. Does this signal a broader shift in how our front office views our long-term defensive strategy, or is this simply a case of poor timing for a talented athlete? Could our front office really be preparing to move on from a former first-round pick before he even hits his prime? This potential roster shift feels like a drastic departure from our usual draft and develop philosophy, especially when you consider that the player in question is entering the final year of his rookie contract. The truth is, Seth Walder from ESPN is pointing toward a strategic pivot, suggesting that we could maximize our return by trading him now instead of risking a total loss in free agency. With Jonathan Greenard cementing his role as our primary pass rusher, where exactly does that leave young talent like Nolan Smith Jr.? I am genuinely interested in this perspective, but I also want to pump the brakes a little before we assume this trade is a lock. Is it possible that we are overvaluing the immediate return of draft capital over the long-term potential of a player we invested significant resources into? Watching the depth chart evolve, I see Jalyx Hunt facing a nearly identical crossroads. Yet Smith is identified as the more likely candidate to be moved given his specific timeline. This tells me that leadership is aggressively pursuing cap flexibility to keep our options open for next season. Do you think we are sacrificing our defensive ceiling just to bolster our assets for future drafts? Having witnessed similar roster moves across the league in years past, I know these decisions are never made in a vacuum. Coaching staffs often demand immediate production, and when a player falls behind a newcomer like Greenard, the business side of the game takes over quickly. This isn't just about statistics, it is about managing a crowded room where only so many guys can get their snaps. I want to see our draft picks succeed here, but this reality is starting to look unavoidable. So that covers the news, but now let's look at what this actually means for our outlook. The stakes are rising because managing cap flexibility while maintaining a high-level rotation is the ultimate balancing act for any front office. By potentially dealing a player like Nolan Smith Jr., the organization is signaling a clear move toward maximizing assets before his rookie contract expires. And I'll be straight with you, losing a first-round talent feels painful. Yet keeping him as a third option behind someone like Jonathan Greenard creates a tough bottleneck that limits our financial maneuverability. Does this strategy truly improve our bottom line, or are we just thinning out our defensive depth before a grueling schedule? The immediate impact forces our coaching staff to rely more heavily on Jalyx Hunt as the primary developmental project, shifting the entire weight of our rotational pass rush onto fewer shoulders. When we face division rivals who thrive on exploiting younger, inexperienced units, will this thinning of our roster hurt our playoff positioning down the stretch? I'm excited to see what these young men can achieve, but I also want to pump the brakes a little before we assume this trade provides a guaranteed path to success. The math provided by Seth Walder suggests that recouping draft capital now is superior to watching a player depart for nothing, which is a cold logic, but one that often keeps contenders competitive in the long run. My own take is that this move highlights a shift toward high-efficiency personnel management, aiming to keep our window open as long as possible. If the front office pulls the trigger, we need that draft capital to hit immediately to justify the loss of a high-ceiling athlete like Smith. Maximizing long-term flexibility remains the primary objective for management as we evaluate the future of our defensive line. Seth Walder of ESPN recently highlighted that moving Nolan Smith Jr. before the 2027 season could yield significant draft capital, while avoiding the risk of losing him for nothing once his rookie contract expires. And here's why that's a big deal. Our depth chart is currently anchored by Jonathan Greenard, which relegates talented individuals like Smith and Jalix Hunt to secondary rotational roles. Trading a former first-round pick might strike some as a premature surrender, but it provides a clear mechanism to restock our war chest for future seasons. Could we really afford to let that asset value evaporate on the sidelines? The risk naturally involves parting ways with high-pedigree talent that is yet to hit his ceiling, potentially leaving us thin if injuries strike our primary starters. Hunt remains another potential candidate facing this exact dilemma, yet Walder points to Smith as the more probable trade piece due to the specific timeline of his deal. Does this suggest our leadership has already lost faith in their own scouting success? Personally, the way I see it, this move represents a cold, calculated bet on efficiency over sentimentality. I'm genuinely interested in this strategic pivot, but I also want to pump the brakes a little before we assume this represents a total failure of our developmental program. We are watching a clear shift in how this organization prioritizes roster spots behind high-priced veterans. Is the goal simply to maintain a competitive window by flipping youth for immediate returns? That is a sharp question that only the upcoming months will answer as the front office navigates this increasingly competitive and crowded edge rusher room. Synthesizing this news with our long-term team trajectory provides a clear picture of how management prioritizes efficiency over sentiment. Personally, I view this prediction by Seth Walder as a cold, calculated move to prevent asset depreciation, even if it feels jarring to see a former first-round pick like Nolan Smith Jr. on the trade block so soon. Here's the thing nobody wants to say: keeping a reserve edge rusher, even a talented one, while our rotation is anchored by Jonathan Greenard, creates a financial bottleneck that inhibits our ability to target other roster needs. I am genuinely excited about the depth we have built, but I also want to pump the brakes a little before we assume this signifies a failure of our development process rather than a standard reallocation of resources. With Jalix Hunt also in a similar spot, our front office is clearly evaluating every asset against the harsh realities of the salary cap. Do you agree that trading Smith for draft capital is a better move than hoping he breaks out behind our current starters? Furthermore, if the team moves on from him, would you prioritize using those resulting assets on a high-ceiling prospect or a veteran piece to fill a different positional void? I definitely want to hear from the fans.